First of all, I want to say, Nut and Wah, I have great privilege to do the Welcome to Country on the lands that we stand here today. And that's the Guttubanud people. This is my spirit land. And the Guttubanud people are part of the Eastern Mar traditional owner groups, of the traditional owners and custodians of this land. It's in my honour I pay my highest respect to and acknowledge my ancestors, and we call them the spirit people. And to all my elders past and those present, my both countrymen and women that I may stand in front of you today. I also pay my respects to the great spiritual being, and that's Bunjil, the wedge-tailed eagle. The wedge-tailed eagle of Bunjil is our belief, he's our creator of all things. He guides us, he teaches, he provides us cultural needs. He gives us cultural strengths and leads us in the direction where we, from our ancestors, have. And also, importantly, of present and also our future. I'd also like to acknowledge our tribal groups that make up Eastern Mar, and that's the Gulidjan people, the Gunditjmara people, the Guttubanud people, the Jargurrong people, Karayarong and the Japparong people up in the Grampians. And finally, to our neighbouring traditional owner groups. On the eastern side is also the Wadawurrung people, another traditional owner group that we share boundaries. Today we share stories, we meet new people, and I had a good chat to a gentleman this morning, and we spoke a little bit about my work, his upbringing, his traditional formats as a fisherman, about changes, what the future looks like, his family, and we shared that knowledge. So it is an opportunity what today brings us. It also means that we're all on the same journey together as one for your beliefs, your stories, but also where we're heading. For Regional Arts Victoria and Eastern Mar traditional owners groups, I give cultural blessing while on Guttubanud country, and I wish all with greater success in today's forum at any current future projects. While on Guttubanud country, please look after our beautiful and wonderful flora and fauna, our landscape and our waterways, and more importantly, look after yourselves. So welcome, 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 and thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Joey. That was amazing, and really segues well into, I think, today's chat. I hate saying discussion; it sounds too formal. But I think Joey highlighted, how important, small things are that you take for granted, like a name, and the place that you're born and the places that you are connected to are so deeply connected to your identity. If any of those things are taken away, it can have really lasting impacts. I'd also like to acknowledge that the effects of colonisation are ongoing, the impacts of those, and that I think as artists we can walk alongside our First Nations brothers and sisters to help tell their stories, make sure those stories are heard in truth-telling, and a path to treaty and reconciliation. So thanks so much, Joey, for your stories today. My name's Stacey Bobile. I've been working for the past year and a half with Regional Arts Victoria on a project called Making Change. This year we've had several Changemakers events that have all been quite different but the same in a lot of respects, in that we've tried to keep them really quite informal and friendly, open, safe, and I guess more of a gathering rather than a lecture series. And today will be no different. This one potentially could be one of my favourite events for this year, and I have been planning this since the very beginning, to bring the good folk from Float to this particular part of the G21 region, whatever that means. But I've known of these wonderful people for a few years, and I did see, since coming to the Apollo Bay area as part of this work, I've frequented the area quite a bit personally, but since I've been coming down here and done some meet and greets, talked to a lot of the local crew who are working in the creative space and otherwise, I saw a lot of similarities between this area and the East Gippsland area that I'd visited a couple of times to go see what the float crew were doing. Both Lakes Entrance and Apollo Bay are relatively isolated. They have the waning industries of fishing and logging and are surrounded by farmland, but also incredibly beautiful a natural environment that remains intact despite better efforts. There's an active and engaged creative community in both areas, and with multiple volunteer committees and a deep interest in maintaining an identity of this place that is not absorbed by tourism or other commercial interests. So a couple of obvious examples of these projects that inform that knowledge of place. I was really lucky enough to come down to see the performance of the Apollo Bay Theatre Group, Tonight We Sail for Apollo Bay, which was a wonderful production telling, the story of Apollo Bay since colonisation. And last year, as part of Winter Wild, I was also fortunate enough to be part of Amy Silimanis and Richard Colopy's heart maps? Down the line, which combine colonial histories as well as Guttabanud storytelling in a beautiful, immersive, ambulatory experience. So thank you, Amy. The artist's role in deepening understanding, and when I say artists in this sense, I mean all artists, writers, musicians, performers and playwrights. As storytellers, artists are able to provide a perspective that could be something otherwise overlooked or overshadowed. The experiential nature of engaging with a work of art enables this deeper understanding of place, but this focuses more directly with the creation and experience of an object or work of performance. What artists are also uniquely placed to do is provide a creative solution to a problem, to come at things sideways, and to offer an alternative way of thinking and doing that is particularly important when current ways of operating are outdated, tired, and oftentimes dangerous and unsustainable for both community and the environment. So the Float project is informed and born of place, of magical coincidence and a desire to rise above the politics of multiple committees to form a project that is building community and opportunities for a region through storytelling, deep research and collaboration with creative thinkers and innovators. So Josephine Jacoby is a fourth generation or third generation?
Fourth generation.
Fourth generation East Gippsland artist.
Yeah.
And Andrea Lane, further to my left, is a professional writer and communicator who had relocated to the East Gippsland area after marrying an artist. Both of them on the surface are wildly different people. But as co-founders of Float, alongside a small but dedicated group of people, they continue to create stories and resurrect derelict buildings, turning them into creative spaces and unique places of gathering in considered and thoughtful ways that don't necessarily have a deadline. They've developed a winter festival, an amazing artist residency that sits on a lake, an art school, and they're now embarking on a regenerative tourism journey with the Director of Tourism Collab, Diane Dredge. So more on that later. So please welcome Andrea Lane and Josephine Jacoby.
Thanks, Stacey.
Josie, I'll start with you.
Okay.
Can you introduce yourself and tell me a bit about your first encounter with Andrea?
Well, I knew Gary first before
I went to marry.
before Andrea came on the East Gippsland scene. Rick and I had become friendly with Gary Yellen, who I'm not really introducing myself. I'm introducing Gary, but he is worthy. So yeah, I've been living on the one property. My husband and I raised our kids on this patch of land just outside Lakes Entrance. It's on the edge of the Cahoon Forest. It's very precious to us. We've put a Trust for Nature covenant on it. We intend to do everything we can to preserve the bushland on there, and there's probably more than 100 acres of bush. We want to do everything we can to preserve that forever, if forever is at all possible in any way. But while living there and developing my arts practice, I studied art. I'd always been a maker, but in midlife, I had a bit of a crisis of identity, as we do, and really thought, if I'm going to continue with art, I need to get real and understand what art is in the bigger picture. So I went off to Monash and I studied for my bachelor degree, and then I spent some years caring for my mother, who was, her life was ending, and when that was done, I went back to Monash and did my master's degree. And during that time, I met Gary Yellen, who he's an unusual man, I have to say. He was the only artist I knew in our region who was actually making his bread and butter from his art. He's a painter and a sculptor, not a famous one, it's not even terribly startling, I suppose. It's really likeable art that he does, and I admired the man very much indeed. But he could make his bread and butter from selling his art from a tiny gallery where he lived, way off the highway, down a rough bush track, down with a sign up on the highway saying art gallery, paintings and sculpture, was what it said. And people would drive down there off the highway and buy his work and go about their business. And he was making enough to sustain himself with doing that. I'd never contemplated actually making a living from art. I knew that out of respect for my family, I needed to pay my way with art to make it cover the costs. But the idea that I could actually feed myself from it was like, oh, yeah, you're never going to do that, So Gary was a real education for me. And then he met Andrea, and Andrea came along, and that all settled down very well. And I gradually came to understand what she was on about. At first I didn't get it. I just thought, I don't speak your language. As a city girl with a degree in economics and a whole different view of the world altogether, and I didn't understand. But at some point, after her questioning me in various aspects that I'd never thought about, I thought, actually, you're brilliant. You are absolutely brilliant. I'm hanging on to your coattails is what I'm doing. What you are doing here is going to change our world. And I was right. It has, yeah. So thank you, Andrea. It's been amazing.
Thanks. It's been quite a journey. And never a cross word between the two of us, despite our different views of life.
We've spent yesterday and last night together as well, and Andrea has asked me on numerous occasions, so how's this going to go tomorrow? How's this going to go tomorrow? And in my relaxed fashion, which may not work with everyone, I said, oh, we'll work it out. Because I think I'm assuming that the majority of people who are here today have not really heard a deeper story of Float. I know a lot of people do know about Float. So I thought a good place to start would be just maybe a brief history of Float, and then we can talk about where you are right now. But did you want to start with the brief history first, and we can do that to images, or
Can I give you the long history?
give you the long history?
With the slideshow? Yeah?
Sure, yeah, definitely.
I do rely a lot on the images, I have to say. So, yeah, I'm happy with winging it. I'm known for my chaotic mind and just making it up as we go along. But over the years, I have collected a lot of images, and they do tell the story better than I find words do. So if the technology is going to work, we'll see. I'm a little bit nervous about being able to scroll through. So does everyone kind of know what Float looks like and is? And it's a residency on Lake Tyers or Bunyanda. And we built it and we run it. And it's amazing. It has actually transformed, I think, the face of East Gippsland, which had fallen behind in the arts world, I think. You know, it suffered from a lack of interest from council and all sorts of things. But Regional Arts Victoria were always interested in us. And I discovered a knack for writing grants. So being surrounded by artists, my husband Gary and Josephine has been an amazing education for me. So the float's kind of the end of the story in lots of ways. I have a lot of slides. I'm really sorry. I'm going to try to go through as quickly as I can because there's far too many. But I go through and I try to cull them and I can't leave anything out. So I just show this because I started work at, I used to work at Melbourne Airport in the control tower, but then I went to Business Review Weekly and worked for Fairfax. In the era when the internet was discovered, so it was a fantastic time to be working in publishing because suddenly the idea of communication was viable, and I was able to move to East Gippsland and still have a job. If you don't know what Business Review Weekly is, it's, you know, business, Rich 200, all that kind of stuff. And I moved to Nowa, which is the Poor 200. Almost literally, you know, it's statistically one of the poorest communities in Australia, I think. And this is who I got to meet. And that's, I hope you can see the pictures okay. That's Nowa on the gorge under the Trestle Bridge, and this was my introduction to community. And they're still all my friends, you know, Jochen and Esther. What I quickly did, I didn't take that much interest in the arts at first. My view of arts was galleries, things I'd never been in, a foreign concept to me really. But what I discovered in Nowa was that there were a lot of life drawers who created this rich fabric of community, teachers and artists, and they were everywhere. And living in Nowa, it had to be the Nowa Nudes that we then created, which went on to be this event that really showed a tiny, poor town what was possible with a bit of flair, a bit of style. You know, I came with some reasonable design skills to be able to brand things a bit more interestingly. And this was one of the local artists who won the Nowa Nudes every year. But in the end, you know, the prize money of the nudes became $10,000. We had 200 entries every time. It was an absolute sellout because people were so fascinated by that contradiction of a poor town with no artists suddenly dominating the airwaves. And the locals did all enter it, and so did the best artists in the region would come and participate. And I better speed up because I've got a lot more to tell, sorry. But anyway,
Africa also has an knack for alliteration.
Yes. No. So obviously, you know, this is, yeah, so the nudes, and you know, what happened out of the nudes, we went on to build the community centre. We built a sculpture trail that went down to the lake. All sorts of things happened around that energy of something fresh and new. And
what year was this, Andrea?
I went there in 2000, so maybe around 2008, I think, right, probably. But we went for about 10 years, so it had a pretty good following. So that was my first introduction to what I could contribute to something that I really didn't know anything about, and I can't make art and I can't make anything. But I got to know the community really well, and I have been transformed by what regional communities are and the knowledge that they have, and they don't kind of celebrate enough or showcase and make look really sexy, you know. So for me, my introduction to that was fruit. And this is a friend of ours, Elizabeth Blakeman, who suddenly I was shown how people grow backyard fruit and they bottle it, and this was like what they were doing in the city as a groovy destination thing, and out here was second nature with CWA skills and all sorts of things. So we used to go down to the gorge and bottle fruit, and as Josie and my friendship developed, Josie has very different skills to me, so part of them is bottling. I still have no clue. Yeah, all the food stuff. But an artist arrived from Tasmania and told me that what we were doing in celebrating bottled fruit was engaging in socially engaged art. Great, I've got some more words to throw around. and introduced us to this idea of the fruit cart. And this was an idea that we saw in New South Wales. There were a couple of very groovy artists doing mobile fruit breakfasts and things. So we got some Creative Victoria funding. Gary Belsky lives in the next town, who is an industrial designer and a welder and a blacksmith, and he built us a fruit cart. And that fruit cart still operates beautifully, and it's where we deliver our fruit breakfasts from. So that was what we did. We just really travelled all around East Gippsland offering free breakfasts. I couldn't have done it without Josie, who makes it art. But as you can see, everywhere from Swifts Creek to Goongerah to Mallacoota to Bairnsdale, we'd arrive in town with this cart. And yeah, I think it really kind of captured people's imagination, and they loved the generosity of what we were providing. Some people donated, but you know, mostly we were happy to just, that's Josie's philosophy, give away everything. So that was in East Gippsland, where we travelled around and did breakfasts in all those places. And I have to say, this is, I don't know, 2015 or something. But all those friendships we made doing that still support us. So when we do anything now, we know that we'll get people coming and saying, cheering it on, because they know what a long celebration it's been of the culture of the region that just wasn't being showcased until this time. I met a young girl, Jess John, who was working at Macca's as a 15, 16-year-old hamburger maker, but she had this incredible ability to design and make logos and all sorts of things, and she loved what we were doing, and suddenly we represented something quite aspirational for a town that she'd grown up in.
And those beautiful photos of Andrea and Josie that we've been
Oh yes, yeah. Yeah, she's amazing. She's also been on the RAV board for a few years now. She's kind of my default daughter, I suppose, but it's just been lovely to see someone so young, so inspired, and really run with the opportunities that we created. So she made this logo and designed the fruit logo. Then we got invited to the Writers' Festival in Melbourne to come and cater for it. And those kind of breakthroughs, you know, every little thing was a win for this anonymous, obscure place in Far East Gippsland that nobody had ever heard of. So, oh God, that's quite hard to do, left-handed. So around this time, obviously the F word was coming into play, and what I realised was we could actually create this brand that didn't need a marketing company. It just needed a couple of local talented people who nailed the design of things, and then we played with F for everything. So Fruit became Fruitville, which was an annual event that we ran and served breakfast for a couple of hundred people. And again, it was that celebration of the local talents, quite traditional CWA kind of skills, I suppose, or just normal, you know, neighbourly kind of skills, but it engaged the far east of Gippsland. And that was a real breakthrough for us, because they'd long been reviled, is it a word?
Yes,
yeah, thank you. For their environmental stance. You know, they've been the ones that have protected the forests for forever, and would often be shot at when they came into town. You know, if back in the day, before I was there, you know, that was not the politics of the region. Oh, why can't I do that left-handed? So, yeah, we established Fruitville. They all came, they all served their beautiful food. This was a beautiful artist who catered for this event at the Nicholson River Winery, Tony Adams, who was from the Slow Art Collective at the time. And it just showed everyone how communities could cater in a different way. You know, I'd been to other ones before where the hummus pack was, you know, the lid was taken off and stuck on a plate, and suddenly we had this kind of thing going on that people got excited about. And having a bit of a grant thing helped cover costs of things. We never paid a lot for things, but certainly when Costa came, that put us on the map. You know, suddenly council understood that this was something that was actually media friendly, interesting, and yes.
He does have quite an effect on a number of things, which is amazing, really.
Yeah.
And yeah, having engaged in like an art event.
Yeah, and just so generous with his time. You know, he would come down and just spend the whole day there. And please make me go quicker. One thing I should mention that we'd had a bit of luck with grants, and I think that was largely because we'd come from no one ever submitting successful grants, you know. So I think RAV and Creative Victoria probably said, something's from East Gippsland, you know, this is great, we'll support them. But the CEO at the time said to me, Andrea, you're going to have to find an alternative to just writing grants. It's not sustainable, it's not going to be the future. So at the time, the Social Traders Crunch program was running, which allowed us to learn how to be a social enterprise. Back in the day, they actually paid us to do it. They don't do that anymore. I think you've got to pay to participate in a business planning program. But this was just amazing. 6 months of us being funded to go down to Melbourne and have accommodation and work with social traders and an MBA mentor to develop an amazing business plan that really spent the time in saying, what have you got? What are you doing? How are you going to make money out of it? What's your, you know, all the things that proper business planning requires you to do. What that business plan told us was that there was a kind of a tourism destination in what we were doing, that we didn't have the infrastructure, we didn't have a lot of motels, we don't have fancy hospitality or accommodation, but we have beautiful environments. So the business plan that we did with the social traders really revolved around glamping as a thing that we could pursue, and that we should use our creative talents to make that really appealing. So we decided to call for campster designs. You know, what would you come and camp in if you came to East Gippsland? And as a little kind of hint, I suppose, we went to architecture students, and they were all willing to pay $50 to actually enter this competition because it became part of their portfolio. So they all paid to enter, and this was a design that won. They were actually Giant Grass, who are a Melbourne-based bamboo design company. They won the $5,000 for that design, and then we crowdfunded the building of it, which again was another lucky thing that just, you know, when you're on a roll and things are happening and people are excited. So we were able to build this camping pod. We've only ever got the prototype, and it's still in Josie's backyard, I think. But anyway, that's it was the thing that went viral worldwide. You know, so we've had a few of those wins where something's just caught the social media attention, and that was really one of them, which led us to decide we should have an artist-made travel bureau. I still think that's a really good idea, and I think it's something we should be talking about with our Australian walking artists, you know, is how do we show off what's here better by packaging up experiences that people can come and immerse themselves in, that actually pays the artist for what gets produced, not just the hospitality business. Fancy restaurants and motels actually come and do workshops, experience the art. We set up in Docklands for a while. People probably know Renew Docklands, that Marcus Westbury created, and that was our base for a year or so. Josie and I went down and stayed at Docklands for a year and told everyone how magnificent East Gippsland was. So the point of all that is just to say, you know, we didn't start out with a plan knowing where we were going or what it was going to be. We just kept experimenting and working on what worked. And then my husband said to me, what about a floating art studio? That'd be nice on Lake Tyers. And we said, yeah, sure. And we applied to the Regional Arts Victoria Small Town Transformation grant for $350,000, and that's what we got. I will defy all the good rules of community work to say we didn't do a whole consultation, because everyone that I went to across East Gippsland, it just divided everyone. Everyone had a better idea. They all, you know, fell into arguments and all the rest of it. So our tight little group just went, yep, let's put it in. If it's a good enough case, we'll get the grant, and that's what we did. Luckily, we have that's Lake Tyers where I live, and that's us celebrating the grant. That was the rough design of float.
That's quite a number of people, like that were in that photo.
Yeah. Oh, look, I just find really that the interest grows. If you put out a what do you want to do, everyone airs their competing demands kind of thing, whereas if you actually go for it and have a really great idea, and that continues on till this day. for the first 2, 3, 4 years, people were probably sceptical about, oh, what's float doing? I've never been out there. I don't know what happens out there. But now that we have so much more to show, people go, I get it now. That's just to kind of show that as part of building the float studio, we used to meet at the tavern every Tuesday, and that was a totally informal thing. Started off Josie and me just meeting in the tavern for a coffee on a Tuesday morning.
Tavern Tuesday.
Yeah, Tavern Tuesday. And I honestly think these conversations are like were really important to developing new ideas, but so informal.
Yeah.
So you'd meet. It was a regular thing, and anyone could come. Is that how they worked? Like,
yep, and they just grew and grew. And I think that at the moment there seems to be a lot of avoidance of committee meetings, minutes, agendas, all those kind of things. But actually, if you come and enjoy and have a laugh with Annie, Phyllis and Barb, and you know, it does keep growing. And although there's all women in that one, most Tavern Tuesdays were equally distributed gender-wise, because we weren't just talking about art in galleries. We were talking about the lake, the salinity of the lake, the level of the lake, when's it going to break through, all sorts of things that were of equal interest to all sorts of people, not people who identified as artists necessarily. So yeah, then we started building it. So a pretty mammoth effort. That's probably Josie's son who's building it. I don't know.
He did all the metal part.
Yeah. So it's a major effort. Like, this is maybe 2 years on the lake of building this in situ at the end of the jetty. I mean, there was a lot of paperwork and stuff that had to go on to get to this point and be compliant with all the rules and regulations, and being on a lake. It is a Ramsar listed lake, and the Lake Tyers Aboriginal Trust is on the other. Did you say no to me, Rick? Oh, sorry, I thought you were disputing my... Lake Tyers Aboriginal Trust is on the other side of the lake, so, you know, it's a really precious space that we need to collaborate on and share. That's what it looked like at the launch. That's my husband doing the speeches. He normally does the talking, not
the
me.
infamous Gary.
Yes. Sorry?
The infamous Gary. Yeah. And remind me to get back to how, like, this building it on the lake, because we were talking yesterday about the waste side of things and how, like, and this was just a really great example of how, like, even though it's an artist residency, but the problems you had to solve around it in terms of its location and placement and, like, the environmental impact, you had to come up with something completely different.
Yeah, it's my favourite subject. Waste, give me the grey water, give me the toilet, you know.
Segue, because
I will deal with it. You know, I did the first residency on float. We built it. We finished on volunteer labour, largely our husbands and sons and friends, you know, finished building it because we'd used up all our money. And it was obviously a fabulous thing that we'd done. It's really well designed. The design had been, my husband is a fisherman, knows about boats, knows about the problems of having a vessel in the water and what happens. And our sons have grown up with that knowledge. So the design is carefully done so that the only part that touches the water is plastic. So it's impervious, stable, polyurethane, probably black plastic, big pontoons that are in the water, and the rest is built on top of that, and none of the metal or the wood touches the water. So you've got no problem with electrolysis, you've got no problem with that kind of, you know, solid liquid interaction that creates problems that you didn't want to know about. So that gave me confidence that, okay, these blokes know what they're doing, it's good, it's fine, it floats. We've worked out the logistics. We've worked out the logistics of solar power, of catching water so we've got drinking water on board. I went on and did the very first residency, and immediately I could see that there were some things we had not thought out well, and largely that was about waste disposal. And so I fixed it in my head that we have to deal with this, and set about it over a period of several years, actually working out the problems and learning from the lake. You know, Lake Tyers is it's my heritage as much as anybody's, I suppose. I'm fourth generation of Lake Tyers, you know, living close to the lake, having land there, and knowing that it's a really unusual estuary in that it's not supplied by any major rivers at all. It's only from little creeks in quite a large catchment, but it's totally dependent on weather. So it only opens to the sea when you get enough rain and not so much evaporation that goes again, but the lake will gradually fill, and then out it goes, opens to the sea and it's gone. And then this whole life and death cycle begins again, you know, because it becomes, in large rainfall events, it becomes quite fresh water in the top end, but it remains saline down near the beach where it's got constant, well, at least air input from the ocean. So it is very precious, and it dawned on me while I was on there doing that first 6 weeks that what we'd done had the potential to damage something that I loved, that in the name of art, perhaps we were going to do something that I would regret forever. And I'd better pay attention, because if we don't do it well, and if we don't set it up in such a way that every generation can do this well, then we've got a bit of a problem. And the other thing about it is it's really big. Float is big, and it was built there on the lake. So you can't get it off. The only way to get the thing out of Lake Tyers is to dismantle it, basically pull it to bits, take it off bit by bit. It's there forever, you know. As long as it can be maintained to not fall apart, then it's going to be there. So we better get it right. And this made me start looking at what the lake does with overloads of nutrient and how that works. Made me start a round of water testing and finding out what is there, what are we dealing with, testing our waste, testing the lake. You know, all of these things played into quite a long investigation of how to do it. And we all decided collectively, it wasn't just me, we collectively decided that the best way to tackle it would be perhaps a reed bed system that could treat the water on site, a floating reed bed system. And they're not, that whole idea isn't a frequent thing. Usually waste systems on the water are taken ashore. Somehow the waste is piped ashore and dealt with on land. But in this case, we did try that and it was disastrous, and we will never try such a thing again.
And unpleasant.
And really unpleasant. And Gary and Rick had a few really bad experiences, and I witnessed those and thought, no, we don't take this any further. You know, we stop that here. Change the system, work out how we can deal with our own waste on board. Not only how we can deal with it, but how the resident, the artist who comes to stay there, immediately becomes aware that there's a consequence of existing. You know, you're there on the lake floating. You can't get ashore unless you paddle. You know, you've got to jump in your kayak and paddle ashore. There's no jetty that you can walk along and jump on board. It's not like that. You have to cross the water to get on board. So you become really aware of the consequences of even your own body. Never mind the food you eat and the food waste you create, but the grey water waste and the toilet waste became major issues. And we have collectively resolved that by observation, by understanding what other creatures live there with us, what the plants are doing around the lake, that it is shared habitat, that it's a more than human world. You know, it's not when you're a minority. When you're there on the lake, you're one human on this floating thing. And there's other people, but they're a long way off, you know. So you are a minority. There's many, many other things. The fish were so noisy that you were aware of the sound of fish, you know.
Jumping up underneath and hitting them.
Amazing. The birds are really numerous. So, you know, there's just a lot going on. There was Ricali coming on and off. You know, the little water rat that we have, beautiful. So this made us, Andrea Wordsmith, gosh, she's good, observatorium, she called it. She said, we could call it something like an observatorium. And I love that word. I think that's so important that we learn. You know, the most direct learning you can do is by observation. If you learn it by personal observation, you will remember what you learned. Whereas you can read a book or you can, you know, be taught something and you will retain some of it. But if it's a lived experience and you have directly observed it, that's very direct. So yeah, that's what we've done. We've actually we've put in a platform that has wicking beds with coastal salt marsh plants in bed. They're not, reed beds sounded like a good idea because that was the catchphrase, but in fact what the lake is using is salt marsh. It's salt marsh plants that are there and that will survive the flooding and the drying out and all of the things that happen in the lake. We've used those in a series of beds that the waste flows through. We've got a huge compost bin. We're composting. It's working. It's provably working. And it's, I don't know, it seemed like, how have we turned through clever wording and clever funding, we've turned our waste into art.
It was arts funded. Creative Victoria
arts funded.
the building of the observatory for 2 years. So, things like that. And I think it is something that we were a bit ahead of the game of using art for global solutions to questions,
Art is innovation.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
And the thing is too, it's very unique. Like, it just occurred to me when you were talking, I was just trying to think, would there be any other occasion, because it's in place and it doesn't move, like all of us have been on houseboats and stuff on lakes, but you're constantly moving from one place to the next. So being in place in an environment that no human being normally is, like on the water for extended periods of time, that's an experience that not many people would have had, that's fully still and in place, that gives you the chance to think about all the things you do normally in your life, like go to the toilet and, wash your dishes and but just in that different environment.
In advance, I think that's the thing we've learned along the way, so that any artist who comes to be on board knows that they're going to be dealing with their own shit. And so don't turn up and...
I think if we looked after.
So that, and just what to bring. Don't we bring perfumes and shampoos and things like that? We don't want that going down the water, all that stuff. So that's kind of a growing introduction to float that, we're lucky to have Leanne now looking after all our artists in residence to tell them that. So, yeah.
Yes, but we didn't recognise this fact instantly. It was something that, as the problems arose and you had to come to terms with how you're going to deal with that, well then, you started to extrapolate on what that meant for the next person to come on board, and how can you possibly set this up so that it's not always me paddling over in my kayak and fixing the toilet or whatever. It's something that anyone can learn and anyone can deal with as we go, so that when the resident comes on board, it's not perfect yet.
And it does require some maintenance, because you were saying yesterday, there's no one that, there's an artist in residence at the moment, and we're like,
Yeah, it did dawn on me when we were leaving to come here that in fact Gary's in Queensland, I'm here, Rick's here. Who do we call, Who's it going to be? So I did line up with my son. Well, the other thing is that we have now set up, I was kind of float keeper for a long time. I was the one, all through COVID when no one was going on board, I just luxuriated in, float was basically mine, I'm going to go there whenever I like, I'll stay if I want, I'll, take a packed lunch, or I'll stay for a week, I had the luxury of doing that through COVID, which was a great pleasure. But I was float keeper, looking after float and working out the systems and solving the problems and all of those, the domestic problems on board. But, there's solar power, which, is not always simple. There's water, there's, all of these things are contained on the vessel. But now we have, by our broader circle of amazing contacts, I can't believe the people who come in, it's just wonderful. We've got this young man who's he's living in a tiny house on our property, and for rent, he doesn't pay rent on our land at all. He uses my studio bathroom and, all of that. But he looks after float. So he does the inductions and the cleaning and all of the things that I was doing. Isaac is there doing that, but he's away as well. This week, he's gone to Sydney.
We timed it perfectly.
It was like, what am I going to do? So, I rang my son who built the thing and said, look, you're the one who knows this best. If nothing will go wrong, I promise you nothing will go wrong. But if it does, would you be the one who will jump in your boat and go over and sort it out? So that's where we're at this moment. And so far as I know, nothing's gone wrong.
And the artist in residence at the moment is a writer.
Yes.
Which is, well, I guess something that we should talk about, seeing is like we are talking about placemaking and identity and artists as storytellers. What is there some kind of expectation when you're applying for the residency on Float that there's some reciprocal, like there is an engagement with that environment? Or are you quite open to people coming and working on their own project? And I would imagine it'd be hard to be unaffected by the environment. But what's come out of, I guess, the residencies? What are the most notable things, or do you have expectations?
I think all of that is so. We honestly, we live fairly closely together. We're working on the same project all the time, but it's so rare for us to get an actual face-to-face conversation where we speak. You know, I'll speak, you listen, you speak, I'll listen. Mostly it's online, you know, in the evening, quickly, what do we do about this? But my opinion of that question is that we give the artist every opportunity to interact with our community and to be part of the broader picture of what Float is, but we don't put heavy expectations on them. We don't insist that they produce something or do something. We let them decide how much they want. I wouldn't want to go anywhere to do a residency with that kind of pressure driving me. I want to have time and space to learn about that place. And I think that's what we offer. And it works a treat. They love it. Yeah, it's really good. What do you think about that, Andrea?
Yeah, no, we haven't defined it. When we had the Tavern Tuesday, which was a little bit disrupted by the pandemic, we were meeting weekly, but once we couldn't all gather, there was a bit of a hiccup there. But we'd probably say we'd like you to come to Tavern Tuesday and talk about your stay, your own practice and things like that, but not to actually produce anything. And you do stay there for free as well, you know, so I guess that's, I think why we have so much love for what we do, because it's actually putting the artist at the forefront of what we're offering and their practice and thanking them for being artists, I suppose, and the benefits just keep flowing around. We now do ask them to pay for their insurance, because that was something that became really hard for us to get. After bushfires, insurance just disappeared. So we've managed to find a kayak operator whose cover can actually cover the artists for being on water. That was the big obstacle for us, was anything on water is almost uninsurable. So yeah, we've been really lucky to have Derek there for that. But mostly people come grateful. They don't complain. If they come and the toilet's blocked or something, whatever it is. No, it doesn't block. No, sorry. Whatever it is, the solar battery's alarm's gone off or whatever. No one would ring you and say, "Oh, come and shut this." You know, they just say, well, "How can I help? What can I do?" You know. So I think that works well for us as the umbrella for all the other things that we do, and that gratitude actually magnifies with the other interests that we pursue, and people love it.
And like, so there's an ongoing relationships, I'd imagine, like they don't just leave and you never see them again. I'm sure like that relationship's ongoing.
Yeah, no, they love us. I mean, the guy who's there at the moment, and really you should go on and, I was going to say check him out, but I guess we do love that it does attract a new generation, so it kind of is going against the tide of what a lot of arts organisations, and particularly in regional places and particularly in East Gippsland, that the committees are getting older, finding it hard to get younger people on board, and they love ours because it's kind of an adventure, it's kind of a life thing. So Bert's there at the moment. He's come from northwest Tasmania and he's a storyteller, and after his first couple of nights he wrote a blog on his stay, and I think Josie said something like, oh, "Be still my beating heart," or something. You know, it was like this perfect
Oh,
expression.
look, to me, when somebody, I don't care who it is, if they might be a writer or a musician or a painter or whatever, printmaker, if they come on there and they melt into the lake because it's so beautiful and they love it so much, I'm melting with them, you know. I love it. And when I can see that we have done something that engages another artist to absolutely embrace that environment and love it too. Oh, it's the best, you know. It's a really wonderful feeling. Yeah.
And I think what we're finding that, you know, maybe there's 3 or 4 of the artists in residence who now want to move here to East Gippsland because they would never have discovered it without that invitation. And a little bit like woofers, if you remember them, you know, it's that new generation coming and discovering a new area and realising it's actually kind of cool, you know, they might never have heard about it otherwise. And so Isaac is one. Bert just said to me the other day, I think I might like to live here too. Kate Rich, you know, has said, I want to come and live here. You know, so just being able to provide that kind of flexible, affordable housing option in ways that we're yet to discover. Like, they're not going to stay on float, but there are a lot of underused spaces in regional places that if you can be useful on people's properties, they're probably up for some kind of exchange with people who want to invest themselves in the region. So yeah.
So we've gotten to on foot.
Oh, sorry. I'll try to. I left it there just because I've been starting to talk to the Australian walking artists, and yeah, I just think as I've said, I'm not an artist, but I love walking and I love being surrounded by artists, and I like that. I'm not quite land care material. I'm not quite, you know, like I don't identify species. I don't, you know, fuss over the minutiae of things, but I love being around people who do. So, you know, every walk is a bit of an adventure, and I do think that's the future for us in Far East Gippsland, is for people to come and explore it on foot, and we just need to get better at marketing that. I think it's a movement that we all kind of know that attracts people, whether it's long-term or short-term. On foot was a big part of it, and it is working with Landcare and those kind of organisations to just get that overlap between people's love of the environment and others' love of observing it. The Walking Festival was a great highlight that Like and Kelp curated for us at the last Feral MBA. And I think that's another thing that we can do on our scale. We don't need to be big. We don't need to be the grand event that gives everyone heart attacks and then there's a disaster when the weather's no good, and why so many festivals are disappearing. You know, there's just so much stress to do something beyond anyone's capacity, whereas this was, I think, 8 artists who just took quite small walks through places that we know and could...
And it really is small, and it's surprising, the storytelling element of what goes on. I learned this from Andrea about how, you know, she's really annoying because there's a camera somewhere looking at you, whatever you're doing, you know. At first I was confronted by this. I really found it, just don't, let me be. But I learned that if you don't tell the story, then it may as well have not happened, you know, so far as an arts organisation goes. If you can't show a picture and tell a story of what you've done, then what did you really do, you know? So this has become really important. And one of the first iterations of On Foot that we experienced was during the winter festival, so it was winter time and quite cold. Skipper Pete was leading a walk from the footbridge, which is kind of the main feature in town of how to get across to the ocean and walk along the beach. He was leading a walk, and he does nature walks, so he's talking about species and all of that thing. But Rick and I would put sausages and a frying pan and a little gas stove into our kayaks, paddle furiously across the lake at the other end, set up. When they arrived at where we were, here we were cooking sausages, venison sausages, eat the problem, you know, the Mona thing of eat the problem. We're cooking venison sausages there and giving them to people. You know, there's no money exchange, but it was part of our festival. And the photos are great. The story's really good. Everybody loved us. And, you know, what's to lose? It was just great. It was great. Yeah.
And you incorporated that as part of the Feral MBA. We had a walk.
Yes.
We did a walk with Skipper Pete.
Yes.
Near Lake Bunga.
Bunga.
And that's terrible. How could I not remember that? And at the end of the walk, you were there with the fruit cart.
Yeah.
And this is how I know that you have amazing lemon curd. Cooking pikelets with this beautiful lemon curd. And after you've just been on this lovely walk and you arrive, someone's got a beautiful cup of tea, the nicest lemon curd you've ever had on a pikelet. It was just the perfect end to a really lovely walk. So,
yeah, good. Yeah.
It makes it just really embeds that experience.
Yeah, look at this.
Bit of food at the end.
You know, my philosophy in art is to reduce everything to the primary source, go back to the initial, what is most important here. You don't come much more important than food, and it works. You know, if you feed people, if you lovingly make something that looks nice and tastes okay, and you feed it to them, then you've won some hearts that will remember that event for, that was a great moment. You know, so we were serving these little apple fritters on a mulberry leaf with a bit of lemon curd on top, you know, so that there was no washing out. There was nothing to deal with, just a mulberry leaf at the end of it, you know. And that visually was very nice, and lemon curd's good, universally popular. And it's a way, food is so immediate, you know, it's so fundamental to living that any time you can do that, you will lay a groundwork of, I think it's trust, but it's special, yeah.
Is this the whole float universe that we have?
Pretty much.
No, not a little bit further to go yet. But anyway, it's actually called the School of Untourism. And I just put that in because I think one of the reasons we've been successful at grants is because we've always had a bigger picture, that it wasn't just a do it, get it finished, put the acquittal in, now move on to something else. It's always been about growing the ecology of what we do. So School of Untourism, this was a project that was funded by Creative Victoria, and we ended up partnering with the National Gallery of Victoria to deliver it for a week in Lakes Entrance with the Open House Melbourne Design Week. So just having so many beautiful things going on meant that the gallery was able and willing to back it as a highlight event of what they did. And I really think, again, it really put us on the map for what we were talking about. And I also love that I have an illustrator. She's actually not from Gippsland, but I did find her quite early on, and she comes to all the conversations that we have. She does that infographic thing of taking notes as illustrations. So every time we get to the end of a phase of the conversation, she can pull together an illustration for me that captures my thoughts, because I'm a bit over words. I don't actually like trying to plough through too many words. But if you spend a little bit of time looking at the illustrations that she comes up with, so we've used her lots for everything that we do. So she's in my head, so she knows what to pay attention to as we. And Harrod Williams is her name, and then we use this artwork in Gippslandia. So that's the local paper, and I've got copies up the back there to show you. She was an illustrator for that newspaper, so when she supplies me with artwork, it's ready to go. She probably will cost me about $1,500 to produce the illustration. The ad in Gippslandia is about $1,800, but I still think that is the best investment we can make, because we've got this permanent asset that's recorded all our progress for the whole time. I can reproduce it as a poster. I can put it in our acquittal. People see it. People love Gippslandia magazine, and Gippslandia is a social enterprise as well. So I love that our budget doesn't go to a billboard in Melbourne that nobody pays any attention to, but actually goes into the pockets of the Gippsland community. So,
Can I ask, Andrew, is all of these sort of projects or things that have been identified, are they things that are happening currently, or do they also include sort of aspirations for the future? Like Lakekeeper, for instance, is that an existing residency, or is that a plan for?
I struggle to break things into done, coming, whatever. So, yeah, you know, so all of those things happen. We still have On Foot running. It's a highlight of the Winter Festival. Iceworks Studio is now open. It's run where the art school is running. Lakekeeper was Josephine. It's now Isaac. And we'll embed how do you become a lakekeeper? We'll embed that into the curriculum of the art school, so that we're connected now with Lakes Entrance Secondary College. Lots of disengaged kids. They don't want to necessarily do academic stuff, but they've got no arts future. There is no TAFE. There's no arts department anymore. So being able to connect them with something that they might feel really comfortable in doing, like getting your boat license to be able to take people across to the boat and tell them, you know, where they're going, are all roles that could be the growth of that lakekeeper. Because Isaac said, I don't want to spend the rest of my life cleaning up float. He's a very talented video maker who does this to help us and to keep the ecology kind of going. So yeah, it's up to us now to find ways to have a little army of float keepers that learn from as we.
But that way of integrative thinking is amazing, like, because the reason why you look to building your own art schools, because the absence of, like, the major tertiary institutions had moved out of East Gippsland, and you know, there are still a lot of young creatives who are looking for genuine pathways into the arts, and so you've but you've built something that's not only providing those genuine pathways, but pathways in place too, like responding to your region, and to incorporate it into the broader operations of what you're doing is really ingenious.
I hope that answers it. Yes, from day one, I've done a mud map of what I think we're talking about, and I'm surprised at how much it has actually happened. But not because we wrote out a business plan with a spreadsheet and a whatever. We just kind of morph towards the things that we agree on, or something might drop off. You know, if we actually didn't find something useful, there's no energy around it. Nobody really grabbed onto that, so it doesn't really matter. But we do keep all these little icons in a library. So every time we've got to present something, I've got a whole brand to draw on, because we've used Anne Harrod the whole time. I will try to go quickly. That's obviously float. That's Lichen Kelp with her float kayak orchestra that she did as part of that event with NGV. You know, it's a sellout. You know, people paddling around listening to handmade music on instruments made by her partner Dylan Martorell, who made all the devices. She recently took that down to the Unconformity Festival at Queenstown. So you know, it's a legit beautiful experience that it just captures a new audience all the time, and Liken's a big advocate for what we do. Just saying we built a communiversity and saying that didn't mean we built anything. We used the unused spaces, Sailor's Grave Brewery, Lake Tyers Hall, Bunga Haven's an old heritage building that gives us their place for the weekends of the Feral MBA. Lake Tyers House is another heritage place that just lets it open for us because they trust us. They know we're not going to trash the joint, we're going to leave it better than we found it. Josie's Place is Bungalow Studio, and then Iceworks So yeah, just keeping those libraries of things that represent our different aspects. Sorry, I got a bit left behind, but that is the observatorium that got built by Josephine's plan. I don't have the picture of the drawing, sorry, but anyway, and that's Isaac there, so he's dumping the shit. Yeah, he's great. That's it from a distance, and you can see the observatorium out the back there. Just to kind of mention, float can only be experienced by people who get onto float. So that means really, if we only offer 8 residencies in a year, that would be all most of the world would ever experience. So being able to take over the lease of the slipway sheds has been fantastic for us. They were empty for 20 years. Council took over the management. They funded the restoration of it. And that's where a lot of our action now happens, and is becoming a hub in the community that people, so we run workshops, we're doing nature journaling, we're doing weaving, we have a little shop in there, and people are really just starting to gravitate there because it's part of the history, it's part of the culture. I went to the slipway here yesterday to see because ours isn't working anymore, it's not functional, the boats don't go up on it, but obviously yours does here. Open mic goes there, you know, all sorts of things. So we pay council rent for this. My mission is to stop paying rent to them and convince them that actually what we provide is so valuable that we should be part of their budget, to say we're like a visitor information centre, we're an art gallery, we're a shop, we're, you know, doing all that stuff that the village should be providing in a town. So
so the location of this in Lakes Entrance is very similar to here, because it's quite central to all the other shops and you know, hospitality.
And being empty all this time, 20 years, it just sits there, you know. So
and now it's actually people are moving around it and using it, and you've got you're probably getting to this, Andrea. I don't want to jump ahead, but you've joined into partnerships with other providers as part of that space. Like you've got seafood and Sailor's Grave Brewing and think there's
From
also a
Jersey.
container there from, oh yeah, and there's a container from the
Yeah, so
the other crew.
The Sailors'
we formed the
Grave,
Slipway Collective, so it
breweries.
is a company limited by guarantee because that's what council needed in order to engage in a lease with us. And so we've got a 5-year lease. And Sam is the local seafood chef. She was married to a fisherman, so she makes great fish tacos and all that kind of stuff. It's still a struggle for them, I have to say. You know, it's gone through winter when it's really quiet. And I would say that what we've done is kept them all alive. Oh, well, I'm exaggerating a bit, but really, we've kept the energy around the place by offering art and workshops and conversations and all those kind of things, while Sam has to go and have a job in another cafe to pay her rent to be in that space. So I'd like us to get better at that. But
So the
Sam-
locale is generally vibrant year round, like even if it's not visitors from like tourism visitors, local visitors are still.
Yeah. The really cold days it goes quiet, you know, but yeah. So yeah, that's the inside of the Slipway, where we had a fisherman's portrait exhibition, the ukulele workshop, postcard exhibitions. Uncle Lenny and Barb, who are local Gunai Kurnai people, and our greatest supporters through all of this. You know, I'm sure you would know, having that knowledge is amazing. And because we're going down the nature journaling path as a future social enterprise for where we are, Barb has been doing sewing lately. So we're going to ask her, or we bought the first batch off her to be the kit for the nature journaling tote bag, you know. So I supplied the drop sheets and I gave them the Australia Day funding to make these bags, because nobody really likes Australia Day. It's very controversial. So actually being able to spend it on an enterprise that has a future was a really good outcome, I think. So Lenny's great. Open mic with Olivia, Feral MBA, you can come and ask us about. That's what the Feral MBA looks like in the Iceworks, which that's not the one before the one you did, but it's an amazing space with attracting the most amazing people to come and develop their business plan. This installation is from the Feral MBA that Stacey was at Josie's studio. And everyone kind of did a bit of an installation to describe their business plan. And this was Nat.
How is it?
That's what?
That's the first photo I've seen of that.
Oh, really?
I've never had a photo of it.
So this was done by Nat, who actually is from Mona. So she actually wants to take Feral MBA to Mona now. And we've said, no, actually it's an East Gippsland thing. So, but they were just so in love with the whole vibe. And, you know, it is something that the Jacobys create for us on their own property that allows us to, you know, run amok and make great food and have these beautiful straw bale buildings that artists love making installations for.
Nat did all that in an afternoon.
Yeah.
She ran around
She
the
was there
area
early.
gathering all of that greenery was just gathered from around, and yeah, it was an amazing installation.
Yeah, it really, it was exceptional. And then Sasha does this stuff, you know, so he's a guy who's come back to East Gippsland to look after his grandfather, and he's well and truly connected with us. He volunteers at the Slipway a day a week, and he makes music, he supports the open mic, and he's just come back from Hamburg to do this. So, you know, it is an exciting time for in fact, I will just do this one. That's Sasha there with Rolly, the Dig guy. So you can imagine what a difference this makes in a community, and particularly for young people who don't want to always turn up at things that are just old people, you know. So we pride ourselves on our mixed generation and approach to things. And so anyway, that's Sasha on his synthesizer.
We try to push the young ones forward in front of the camera and we pull back a bit.
I guess this is perhaps the last thing I'll say. This is at Iceworks, so this is the other part of the communiversity. And I do like to say my husband and I own that space, and I don't say it as a look at us, aren't we good? It's because I think it's a model that every community needs to explore, that there's untapped property wealth that can be far better used and donated. We don't ask for rent. I'd like not to go backwards with it, and I would like to think that one day we will get some rent from the collective that can actually work together to generate an income. But in the meantime, they need time to evolve their plan and get to love it. So we do the Winter Festival in the Iceworks space. These are all the lanterns that then end up being part of the parade. And this is Amy, who is a school refuser. So she's really the reason we started the art school in the way that we did, because she's so creative. I wish I'd put one of her drawings in. She was 16, 17, hated school, bullied, wanted to leave, and she's just been the hardest working lantern producer who's managed to feel what artists feel when they're part of this amazing event. And so, yeah, she's a real leader of what we do now. That's her artwork that appeared in Gippslandia recently. So comics and stuff is one of her favourite things. And I just put this in because this Sam is a graduate of the TAFE back in the day when we had a TAFE, and whose future disappeared when TAFE disappeared, because not only was there no artists coming through, there was no career for them to be teachers or to be practicing artists. So Sam's doing, he makes guitars, he's a luthier, but he's also doing 3D printing. So he's also part of the collective, and he made these for me for the Winter Festival. Zines that we made, that's all of us at the Iceworks, and that's a picture of what the final Winter Festival, I guess. And just to say, that's been really important, that we have a successful festival that council understands generates income, you know, so that's legitimate. They get hundreds of or thousands of people there, and hundreds of thousands in sponsorship, blah, blah, blah. But what's the point of having a festival if you're not actually training a new generation to create it and man it and manage it and grow it and learn all the skills, not just the making, but the marketing and the how to get along, how to aspire to things and be regenerative and all those kind of things.
So the setup of that is very deliberate, like with the planning of the festival you do, is it like a mentorship system or is it a little less formal than that? Or?
It was set up in response to bushfire, and I guess, you know, when everybody was looking for ways to bring the community back together again. So Adam was the brain trust, yes, of doing it. So he had a long history in festivals. He asked Josie and me and Lee and Helenka to be on the directors on the committee for different reasons, because some of us have good connections in small towns right across all of East Gippsland. So what flows on from that committee is kind of up to us. So for us, the art school became a real reason for having a successful festival, because actually we were giving people like Amy a future in understanding what used to happen in regional places and festivals.
It's a really good thing. It cuts both ways. I mean, now we've got a winter festival that is created by the people of the region, and the art school, in that first iteration of our art school, has a purpose in actually coming together and making something that will wind up being the feature of the winter festival. You know, so it really does work well both ways. It's not without certain hiccups, but it's excellent. Yeah.
Well, when you don't have an arts department, you make it yourself, I guess.
Yeah, so now we're into the next, like we've done our first semester of art school, and now we're into the second semester, and this is where the nature journaling is picking up momentum, but they're also learning other things. They're learning, you know, the weaving workshops have been really important. Various.
How to run a shop, how to merchandise things, how to get your online shop up and running. So yeah, and that's where Learn Local, I don't know if that's a statewide thing or not, where they normally fund some of the neighbourhood house stuff. They're loving us because we're actually reaching a younger audience who are really creative, and they can structure it's only small money, but it's better than nothing. So yeah, they've been fantastic at helping us do that.
Yeah, so we can guarantee that our tutors get paid a small amount, you know, and we can add to that if we can afford it. But there's money there to, you know, be sure that it's spread around, that people are not being asked to volunteer.
So the next stage, and this is where we'll probably get Diane involved.
Does everyone need a break? Have we gone on too long? Or do
I
you
was
want to
going.
break
I was going to say we can probably do. I don't know. Is everyone happy to keep going for another 10 minutes, or? Because I think this will be it, and then we can break, and everyone can have a chat independently with the guys up here over lunch. What's next? Can you explain the collaboration with Diane and where you think regenerative development tourism is going for your group?
I think I might throw to Diane. I mean, I'm throwing Diane in the deep end a little bit because I've only just sent her all the business plans we've written over the last few years to digest. We met at the Feral MBA. We have a lot of mutual interest in where creativity sits in tourism that we're all comfortable with, you know. Yeah, Diane would probably give a fresher perspective than...
Give a brief intro of who you are and how you've been working with Flow.
It's really hard to follow up on that. I just feel my heart has completely expanded, and I just feel so... Every time I hear this story, I just feel so in love with what's happening here. So I run a business called the Tourism Collab. I started that business 5 years ago, and I'm a Feral MBA graduate. Yes, yes. The Tourism Collab is a bit of a misnomer because there's no collaboration in tourism. So I started that business thinking that I was going to disrupt tourism by actually reinventing or reframing tourism in a way that was place-based, that de-industrialised it and gave people an opportunity to really visit places and connect with local people, hear their stories, and in the process reinvigorate local economies, give people confidence to find a place in a new economy, and to open up income streams and ways of working that really connect communities. So that was my vision for the Tourism Collab, and I'm not a marketer, so I'm very different to, you know, that word tourism. And I think the way that we connected, I think actually just after COVID, I started doing a couple of workshops in Orbost and Malakuta, yeah. And it was through that I met Andrea and later Josie. And my background is actually in environmental planning, but I've been in academia for a long time. And I've always been thinking about how we can actually build new economies and that reflect the way that ecosystems work. So regenerative economies, regenerative development, regenerative communities is where I've been working for the last 5 years. And so coming and meeting and hearing these stories, and my heart completely expands when I hear Josie talking and channeling a whole lot of living systems theories in just the way that she thinks and works. And last night there was a whole conversation about edge species. And this is what float is. It's an edge species in a new economy that needs to happen, where we're being more inclusive around the people that we're giving opportunities or opening up opportunities for. So at the moment, Andrea is a participant in one of my courses. So I run an online business, well, it's a lot of different programs, but one of them is a regenerative business development roadmap. And because we've been talking for so long, and there's a need to actually be able to, to do some research underneath and to really develop and speak to the policymakers and those sorts of people. So there's an important role for research here, but there's a really important role in trying to conceptualise this and bring this into a wider audience as well, so that we can really start to teach people that there are new ways of working with economies and people and different communities that transcend all of those silos and those boundaries that we've been working in the past. So what I've been doing, and yes, it's been 2 weeks that I've been swimming through a whole lot of documentation from years, and I just, what we would like to do, I think, and we haven't yet talked about this in detail, but it's an emerging thing, is to articulate a roadmap and look at the business models underpinning it, with this idea of actually really trying to map different types of value creation that are happening. So it's not necessarily about money, but it's about all sorts of other kinds of value that is being traded and exchanged that are really going to the heart of well-being and healing and just connection in community. So that's what we're hoping to work towards, to develop some kind of roadmap, and what that looks like, it's still very open, and I love the creativity of being able to work in this space with them. So that's where we're going with that.
It's a very exciting space. Yeah, so many things. And reframing how we perceive value, I think, is really, one of the greatest outcomes from that, because the arts has always been undervalued and at times is seen as an economic drain rather than a contributor to economic and well-being. And talking about economics outside of the monetary, I think, is really important.
Well, I do think there's a growing conversation around health and well-being and the economic cost of, everything that is happening at the moment, and so being able to align some of that conversation with the value of arts in healing and innovation and just that edge thinking that comes from the arts is really so valuable in health and well-being and healing.
So I'd like everyone to please put their hands together and thank our wonderful panellists today. Thank you.